Hey listeners, before we get to the episode, I want to take this opportunity to ask for your support. The American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control is in the midst of a fundraising campaign after the pandemic forced us to cancel our annual education meeting, Vision by Design. Due to the financial obligations and refunds from Vision by Design, the AAOMC has a huge financial hole we now need to pull ourselves out of. This means that the future of the Academy and Vision by Design is uncertain, and we have no choice but to ask for your support in order to help make sure that the AAOMC and Vision by Design survives. If you're a dues-paying member, we have a fundraising drive running with benefits to supplement your membership, which you can find by clicking on the banner at the top of the Academy website, which is aaomc.site-ym.com. If you are not a dues-paying member, please consider becoming one. AAOMC paid members enjoy many benefits in addition to supporting an organization devoted entirely to the practitioner and specialty care. And finally, please only give if it in no way brings you harm. We understand that these are difficult times, which makes asking you for your support that much more difficult, considering not everyone is able. Thank you. And now on to the episode. Welcome to The Corrected View, a podcast about myopia control and the people devoted to its role in specialty care. I'm your host, Matthew Herzberg, the Executive Director of the American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control. In each episode of this podcast, we discuss news, education, and important topics in and around ortho-k and myopia control. But this isn't a podcast where it's my opinion about myopia control that are the ones that count, but instead, yours, the clinicians, academics, students, and industry experts that make up our larger overall community. So if you have something to add, you can join the conversation in our AAOMC Facebook group, or email the podcast at thecorrectedview@gmail.com. As parts of the country begin to reopen from shelter in place, and with the potential prospect of having to do this again in the fall, I thought it might be useful to highlight the Academy's fellowship program. AAOMC Fellowship is the gold standard in orthokeratology, and over the years, when I talk about fellowship with our members, the feedback I receive says that although many are interested in becoming a fellow, some members simply don't have the time to focus on the preparation and study requirements. Now I feel like some of that has changed. With the current state of the world and the uncertain future of COVID-19, maybe we do have the time for projects like Attaining Fellowship. So I thought, why not have Drs. Cauchi and Avi Zlatin, our two fellowship co-chairs, on the podcast to discuss what fellowship means, why you should become a fellow, and what goes into the process to attain it. Join us for that discussion coming up next. I have with me today the co-chairs of the Fellowship Committee for the American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control. First is board member Caroline Guerrero-Cauchi. Caroline, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much for having us.
And after that, I have Avi Zlatin, a new board member with the Academy. Avi, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Matt.
All right. So I figured because we have the opportunity to have the two co-chairs of the Fellowship Committee, and because of what's happening with COVID-19 and everyone's kind of got some downtime, I figure we should talk about fellowship. And the reason why is, with some time on your hands, maybe fellowship was something that you had considered in the past and you just never got around to it, didn't have the time, didn't know what to do. Yeah, but now maybe we do have a little bit more time. So I figured, why not do a whole podcast episode about fellowship and what it entails, and maybe if that's something the membership is interested in pursuing. And, we got a little bit of time to do it, so why not check it out? So I'm going to start with Avi. Let's just clear it out with the basics. What is fellowship with the American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control?
So fellowship is a very high level of training. So fellows have undergone advanced training, rigorous testing, and have demonstrated their level of expertise in myopia control and orthokeratology. And they do this over several years. They do the testing in front of boards of doctors who are already fellowship trained. So there's a lot of scrutiny involved with it. A fellow is also, once you have a fellowship, it's literally the gold standard, and it represents the highest level of knowledge of ethics and patient care in myopia control and orthokeratology. So fellows serve also as mentors to other doctors, role models for other practitioners, and also in the general public.
I gotcha. And the fellowship isn't just on the American side. The AAOMC is a subcategory of an international section, the International Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control. Caroline, what is the history behind that fellowship?
Well, what happened is in the very, very beginning, there was an organization known as the Orthokeratology Academy of America, and that preceded everything else. And the founding fathers of that particular organization, which is our organization now, it's just morphed along the way, developed the first test. Now, I would tell you the names of those founding fathers and the very first fellows in the academy, but the problem is I can't remember all of them, and I don't want to say any of them because I'll leave somebody out and then they'll be mad at me. So the only one I'll mention is Kerry Herzberg because he got the ball rolling, and that's where the very first fellowship test happened in his house because it was that small at that point. So it was very, very small, and they decided what they wanted to do was empower the leadership of the organization by establishing some rigorous standards. So they set up the testing. They wrote the test, and then, of course, all had to take it and pass it, and they did. Came to be our very first board members as well. So the first fellows were the first board members. That was about 15 years ago. In 2007, Ken Mahler and I sat for the fellowship test, and that by that time there were a few more fellows, but not a ton. And I actually became the first female fellow, and Ken and I became the first wave users to join the ranks and custom designers. And at that point, many more joined. In 2011, the Academy decided that the world of orthokeratology was much bigger than just in the United States, and we were approached by the Europeans, and so they had their own little organization, so they said, let's join together. They did, and then we bought in China, and we bought in Australia, and now we have really pretty much the entire world, which is called the AAOMC. Now, across the world, we have 143 fellows, and in the United States, I think we have about 85, soon to be a whole lot more because we're currently in the process of finishing our testing for 2020. So 143 fellows, and it's been, about 15 years. So we're moving along, and in the last few years, we've gained many more fellows because as orthokeratology and myopia control become a lot more known, people want to demonstrate their expertise because they've been doing it. They just didn't know that our organization existed, so they want to join and become a fellow too.
Yeah, and I remember you mentioned, you and Ken Mahler, and if I remember correctly, because I was helping out back then, and I remember the whole wave component threw them for a loop because you had your first couple of generations of fellows, because the way Kerry did it was he would have a group of them over at his house, and there was a nearby hotel. So for the weekend, these doctors would come in, and then the testing and the lectures and whatnot were all done at Kerry's house. And I remember that first group, once a couple of more wave fitters came along. I think David Davidson was a wave fitter.
You're right. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was, and he tested me and Ken. So you're right, we're a bunch of liars. He was the first wave fitter. Yeah.
Right, but there wasn't but the point I'm trying to get at was there wasn't an established wave component. So right. So what I am saying is that you and Ken definitely were trailblazers because David Davidson had taken the fellowship without a wave component. So that had to be written for the two of you. So you're still telling the truth. You're still fine.
Cool. Oh, good.
So we've established that fellowship is the gold standard, and we've gotten a little bit of history. So Avi, I want to ask, what does fellowship mean for someone who does ortho-k, and why should they get it?
Well, the first, I think, and most important is personal satisfaction. Knowing that you've achieved that level of professionalism is very, very satisfying. You're going to increase your knowledge base in ortho-k and myopia control. No matter what you think you know now, when you start studying and preparing for fellowship, you're going to learn so much more than you ever thought was going on with orthokeratology and myopia control. You're also seen as an authority. Lots of doctors will call you and really ask for your advice, your suggestions in helping them out with difficult cases. The other benefits of fellowship is you get a prominent listing on the American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control website. So when there are searches, you are seen as an authority. Patients will ask, what is a fellow? And they will gravitate to those doctors if they're available in their area. So it's very important. Also, when patients move from state to state and from area to area, and they start looking for doctors to take over the care, it's usually fellowship trained doctors that can manage very complicated cases and transferred patients, because all doctors fit things in the molds in different ways in different companies. And once you're fellowship trained, you know how to handle many, many different types of designs and techniques and how to adjust things over time. So that's what I believe fellowship would bring to you.
Gotcha. And the fellowship process is, in its original state, it was very rigorous. Going back to the original days that I mentioned before, like I remember being a very stressful, very difficult test, and it's evolved over the years to accommodate the needs and requirements of the modern orthokeratologist. And Caroline, I was wondering if you could just run us through really quickly, like what is the process of attaining your fellowship?
Okay. Well, the first thing is that you have to be selected. Not everybody who applies will be selected for two reasons. One is sometimes they don't meet the requirements, but secondly, there's only so many spaces that we can open up for testing, because it's not easy, and it's all done with volunteer doctors. And if we don't have enough volunteers, then we can't test. But, how do you test 50 people in 1 year? It's just too hard. And so we do try to keep it to like a 10 to 12 group, which is fairly manageable for us. Some of the other sections can't even do that much because they don't have that many fellows, and they're not as big. But because we're bigger, we can test about that many people. So you'll be submitting an application, and then we select based on your credentials and what we think you can do. And you also have to write a little essay telling us, what you're going to do with the fellowship. And that plays into your selection. If someone says, well, I want it just so I can be famous, well, who cares about that? We want to give back. And so we want to hear some level of commitment with that. Also, I think we're going to be changing the application process a little bit so that people have to submit a case, but we're still working on that. That's a process. Submit a case to be evaluated just so that we can tell what your qualifications are, but that's a work in progress right now. Anyway, so the next step then is they have to spend time in self-study and in group study. So self-study, you take out your books, you read the different topics, and I have a very nicely defined video of exactly the topics that you need to cover. And so there's no question about what will be on the test. And so you can amend your own studying by using that study guide, but then the group of 12 or 10 or whoever, how many people are taking the test, get together, and I give them topics, and I say, okay, guys, prepare a PowerPoint presentation on this topic, for example, on axial length or candidates that are appropriate, things like that. Nice PowerPoint, and they share, everybody shares with everybody else. And so you'll only prepare 3 or 4, but you'll get 48. And they're all well done. And myself and Avi look at those PowerPoints before we let them be shared because, what if they're wrong? So we also check them. And then you've got a nice, beautiful study guide. And by doing the PowerPoint, it also helps you study even better. So instead of just reading it, you really go into depth on that. So it helps broaden your study process. Then you have to prepare 2 case studies. Well, one case study that you give is for practice. So it's that we look at it carefully and give you very good feedback. Well, why did you change this particular curvature here? What do you think was wrong with this? Where's the map on that? And we do give extremely careful directions on how to prepare a case, but the candidates will prepare it, give it to us, and then we'll look at it and go, I don't get this. I don't get that. Where's this? Where's that? The whole point is that we want you to have a lot of feedback on the first case because the other 2 cases, which you will submit, are going to be for serious and no one's going to give you any feedback on those. They go as part of your test. And so we want to give you a practice one so you really know what the testers are going to be looking for. And we go back and forth until that case is so well prepared that anybody could look at it, know what you were doing, know what you had in mind, and it's a good looking test. So now you know how to prepare the other 2. So the cases are important. Then you also have to pass that test. So there's a 50 multiple choice test. And this year we're having to give it in remote locations, but next year, hopefully, it will be given at the hotel and everybody sits down, takes it. It's about a 2-hour test and everybody gets really freaked out about the test because, we're all doctors and we want to do our very, very best. But for the most part, people pass it. It's not got 100% pass rate, but for the most part, it does. And we do curve it. So we take the top scorer and then that is the 100%. And then you have to get 85% of the top scorers. If you pass that multiple choice test, then you go on to the oral exam. And the oral exam, you sit down with 3 other fellows. They have looked at your 2 cases. They ask you specific questions about the 2 cases. They also show slides so that you can show them, what you're doing. The slides might show some kind of a topographic map, and it will say, what do you see going on with this map? And it's a nice dialogue, so it's not like a multiple choice test. You get to talk and talk and talk, and they get to ask you more questions, basically just determining if you know what you're doing. And I know everybody gets nervous about that too, but we try to make it so that people will be very, very comfortable and it'll just be a nice dialogue. Now, previously, they had to sit through a 4-hour lecture on basically reviewing advanced fellowship skills. And we just stopped that because at that point, the day before the exam, if you don't know all this stuff, you're not going to learn it in the next 4 hours. So instead, we have a nice pizza and beer and wine session the night before where you can just meet with the fellowship committee, ask them questions, get all calm, get all drunk. No, don't get drunk, but you get all calm. And it helps you to feel like, okay, I know I can do this. And we give you words of encouragement. But by that point, you know what you've studied already. So then you go in the next day and you take your test. And if you pass, then we set you up with the individual little rooms where you do your oral exam. So that's the process right there in a nutshell, a large nutshell.
Thank you. And I want to also add that I kind of missed the 4-hour presentation. Now, granted, I've never taken the fellowship process, so take this with a grain of salt here. But I have to admit, I do miss the 4-hour presentation only because we used to offer it at Vision by Design, and it used to be either a free or very low cost to get in kind of course. And you would have maybe, I don't know, back in the day, you would have 6 fellow candidates, let's say, but there'd be, seating for 30, 40 people, and that room would be almost completely filled because there was such an in-depth presentation. There was so much you could learn that a lot of people, whether they were going for their fellowship or not, would pop into that room, and the kind of discussions that would come about from that, the stuff that people were learning in that presentation was incredible to see people's reactions. So in a way, I kind of miss that we don't do that anymore because I think it had value to it. But I am also glad that we're not making these candidates, sit through that, intensive 4-hour period. I definitely like what you've done with the program over the years, Caroline, you and the people that have helped out with it, to make it more accessible and more reasonable, because it's gone from being this Yeah, I mean, when it was originally set up by that first group, it was a real hurdle. It was a huge test. There was lots of requirements. It really made you sweat. And I think it's really nice how it's transitioned into its modern format. And I think that, obviously you've had a huge part in that. And if people don't know that, they should know where it's come from and how much better it is overall. It's a much better experience. So you definitely deserve credit for that.
And to talk about that advanced course, it is given during Vision by Design during the main vision portion of the conference, where it's only 2 hours now, but it's that same kind of dialogue. It's just that I pulled it out because the day was getting to be so long. The people at the end of the day needed to be carried out in stretchers. It was just so.
I remember that day.
Yeah, you see, and it was just too much. And I just said, look, if you don't know this stuff by now, you shouldn't be in the fellowship. It shouldn't be a candidate. So know it before you step in. And if you don't, take it during Vision by Design so that next year you can sit for fellowship, because it just got to be a grueling day, as Avi said.
Right. And so speaking of it, you should know it by the time you get there. Let's then go through what are the requirements to become a fellow. So what are the fellowship requirements? And we'll throw that one over to Avi.
So there's a few requirements. We want to make sure everybody's serious about this. We want to see some continuous membership in the International Academy of Myopia Control for about 2 years. We want to also make sure that the doctors have attended at least one section in the last 3 years, one of the meetings. They need to show us some proof that they've been fitting myopia control and ortho-k cases, at least 50 of them. And doctors right now need to attend boot camp, an ortho-k boot camp, unless they've fit more than 100 cases. If they fit more than 100 cases, they do not need to sit through boot camp. However, I would still recommend it. It's an excellent couple of days. A lot of knowledge there. In the office, these doctors need to use topography. That's an important tool, and it's an instrument that's invaluable for myopia control and orthokeratology. I'm not sure if down the line the pentacam and tomography will be hand in hand or replace it, but topography is critical. The other points that these doctors need to be able to demonstrate is that they can fit in several different types of ortho-k molds, different manufacturers, different designs. It can't be always the same CRT or the same GOV lenses. It needs to be different manufacturers, or they can demonstrate that they design their own. They use software systems that are completely customizable, and they make a custom design for each cornea, and that's acceptable because that is a unique design for each patient. And that's actually, I feel, the highest level and the best way to design and treat patients, to design molds for patients with complicated corneas. But those are basically the requirements for fellowship.
Gotcha. And how much work is that, Caroline, retrospectively, including, everything we've talked about? So, for somebody who's considering their fellowship, like how much work are we talking about overall?
Well, it's a fair amount of work for preparation because you've got to study, you've got to prepare your cases, you got to go back and forth. I would say over the space of about 6 months, if you spent 2 hours a week, that would sound like about what people do. Now, some people don't spread it out that long. Other people like to, right to the end, and then they, do nothing but that. But I figure it's about that much. But it doesn't matter because it's so worthwhile because this is your life. This is important. This is making you a very different person, and it's expanding your skill. And what better thing to do than study this? And so, it isn't that much work.
Yeah, we're looking at a time right now where we have time to do that, essentially, with the COVID situation. So as a kind of follow-up, let's say I've got a lot of time on my hands right now. Well, how can I prepare for fellowship? What should I start doing if this is something I want to do?
Well, right now there are 3 videos on our website that exist, and they're they're in detail. What they tell you first, the first one is, why would you even want to do this in great detail? So watch it and see if that's something that you really want to go on this journey or not. Watch the journey video. Then the other two are talking about how to prepare a case and how to take the oral exam. And so they really go into detail on how to do it. And I think what I'm going to do is we have a PowerPoint that lists, it's like a study guide, but it's a PowerPoint study guide, so the first slide says, well, you need to know this about axial length, and you need to know this about, how to center a lens. What if it decenters? You need to know this about this particular map. Each page has each slide has a different topic. And I think I'll put that up there because it's not a state secret what you need to know. And so let's just put it up there. And that way you could start preparing. You've got all this time. We'll take each of those topics and learn about it. Now, once you actually become selected as a candidate, you guys will be putting PowerPoints together of your own and studying more in depth. But if you've got all this time, then what the heck? You can make your own study guide there and learn all about this. And then I'm going to also put up some case studies so you can look at those case studies and say, okay, I see how they prepared it. I see what's considered complex, and use this time to comb through all of your ortho-k cases and figure out what's a complex case and gather all the data so that you don't have to do it when you're busier at the end of the year, because this would be a great time, and all you have to do is just go through and say, oh, that's that case, that was really hard, or that's slam dunk, we can't do that one. So this would be a great time to be combing through your cases to find 3 cases that are great, 1 for practice and 2 for the real deal.
And speaking of cases, and I'll throw this over to Avi, what kind of cases should be considered? Like, what kind of cases, if I want to be a candidate, should I be looking at?
Well, so remember, you're not just doing ortho-k and showing us ortho-k cases that you can do. You don't want to present these slam dunk, very low prescription -2 sphere cases or low cylinder cases. What you want to do is show us what you're made of. You want to pull out these difficult, complex corneas, high astigmatism, limbal to limbal astigmatism, or high myopia cases. And show us that you can treat those kind of patients properly. And also what's important is show us that you started something that wasn't working well, but you had the ability to figure out what went wrong and how to fix it. Because that's the key. The key is knowing how to troubleshoot, how to address the issues that you're coming up against. And those are the cases that you want to present.
Okay. And do you have like an example case you can give us, just something real quick to give people an idea?
Well, yeah. So one of my cases, I may have presented it during my fellowship, was a very young girl, wanted to do myopia control. Parents brought her in. They were originally from Poland. They moved to New York. And her prescription had a moderate myopia. It wasn't even that high. It was about a 3, but she had about, I believe, 3.5 diopters of astigmatism. And that's just not a great case to start with, but they were very motivated. She was young. She was either 7 or 8 at the time, and she was changing very rapidly. And I looked at the cornea. The cornea had a lot of astigmatism on it. It looks like something that we shouldn't pass by. I think we can treat it. And I was designing molds with software at the time, so I custom designed a freeform lens for her with toric optic zones, with toric peripheral zones, with prism, and it was not a. I believe I presented the case, but it was difficult to present because I think the first design was successful, and that's not really what you want to present. You want to show that you can troubleshoot. However, those are the kind of corneas, those are kind of prescriptions that show a level of knowledge that is not as simple as fitting a -2 sphere. So those are the kind of cases you want to look for.
Right. And Avi, you just hit the nail on the head. It's okay if you submit a case that is done in one lens. if the original design is so complicated that it shows a level of knowledge beyond just the average bear. So done in one's okay if it's like what you just said, toric periphery, toric base curve, complicated. Sure. Okay. You don't have to do any troubleshooting on that because you showed us you were a genius.
Yeah. And sometimes they work.
All right. And then, for the sake of time, I think we'll make this the last question. And I'll throw it over to Caroline. If we could go over, common mistakes that candidates have made throughout the fellowship process over the years, and maybe that can help people plan for their fellowship process. So
sure.
Let me know what you think.
Yeah, I would say for me, the biggest problem that people have is they don't take it seriously. They think that they don't hardly even have to study. They don't look at the study guide and they just think they know it all. And that's all fine, except that you don't know it all. And so they take the test and they're like, I didn't pass. Well, did you study much? Well, not much. Well, there you go. You've got to study. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is we've prepared videos that detail exactly what you need to know and how you have to prepare your cases. And a lot of times they don't look at the videos. And so they give you the case and it's like, you've left everything out. Did you watch the video? Well, yeah, I watched it real quick once. No, watch this video 3 or 4 times because it is absolutely detailed. And we can't. It takes me a lot of time to have to go back and say, did you do this? Did you do that? And I get really mad because now you're wasting my time when I took the time to make the video. So I think preparation, paying attention to the videos and to all the information and guidance we give you, I think that's the biggest common mistake they make. What do you think, Avi? Do you have any other problems that you've run across?
So you hit it on the nail, but I'm going to say it a little differently. What I found very frustrating is looking at cases and having doctors present them and giving us the PowerPoint and setting everything up that haven't really studied that video and understood what they were doing. So it made my job, something that should have taken me about half an hour to do, took me 3 hours. And remember, we're volunteers. We're volunteering. We have, let's say, 12 candidates. We can't spend that much time on each candidate on each case. And when you don't put all the changes on the same page in the same place, one next to each other, and we start having to go and searching, wait, what was the first one? What did you change? Where was the change? And it's not clear to us. It's very frustrating. And when you get to past your first case and you really now are submitting a case for a doctor to evaluate, if they have to start searching around, you're going to fail. It needs to be done properly and efficiently. So I agree with you. You got to watch those videos and understand how to do it.
Okay, sure. All right. Well, if fellowship is something that you're looking to pursue, I have this conversation many times at Vision by Design with members who are considering it. And I'm saying, hey, we're all having to sit out for a little while. Maybe this is the moment where you start preparing cases and getting the process started. And if you want to do that, go to ortho-k academy.com, and up in the navigation bar is the word fellowship. Click on that, and that will take you to all the resources that Avi and Caroline have just mentioned. So to the co-chairs of the fellowship committee, thank you for joining me on the Corrected View podcast, and I hope to see you back again soon.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for this episode of The Corrected View. Remember that this is a community-based podcast, so it's not my opinion that matters about myopia control, but yours. If you have something to add to the discussion, by all means, join us in the AAOMC Facebook group or email the podcast at thecorrectedview@gmail.com.